I rise to move the Geriatric Bill, National Assembly Bill number 50 of 2022 on the floor of this House. Madam Speaker, geriatric medicine is a medical specialty focused on providing care for the unique health needs of the older persons or the adults. The term geriatrics originates from the Greek, meaning old man, and trix meaning healer. So Geriatric Bill 2022 seeks to effect Article 57 of the Constitution of Kenya to ensure provision of proper care and maintenance of well-being of the elderly people of Kenya. Madam Speaker, Geriatric Bill 2022 was committed to the Labor and Social Welfare Committee for the consideration and undertakes pre-publication scrutiny and makes appropriate recommendations required pursuant to Standing Order number 106, subsection 6. The bill therefore seeks to effect the Article 57 of the Constitution to establish a National Council for the Elderly, to provide for the care of the elderly persons, to provide for the empowerment and protection of the elderly persons of Kenya, and maintenance of their well-being, safety, and security. Madam Speaker, world over, a society is measured by how it takes care of the elderly citizens, and therefore, as a country, we need to prioritize the needs of the elder persons of this country, provide budgetary allocations to deliver on such services, and it is on this backdrop, Madam Speaker, that the Geriatric Bill 2022 was developed with the primary objective and operationalization of Article 57 of the Constitution through the establishment of the National Council for the Elderly. Madam Speaker, we are all going to be subjects and victims of age, and therefore it is important that we handle this issue with a lot of concern, because we are either elderly or going to become elderly, or we have relatives, mothers and fathers who are elderly and requires their issues taken care of through the House. The objectives and purpose of this bill, Madam Speaker, is to establish a National Council for the Elderly Persons of Kenya, provide a legal framework that promotes the rights of the elderly as enshrined under Article 57 of the Constitution of Kenya, promote and protect the dignity, the well-being, the safety, the security of the elder persons of Kenya, provide for a framework for the registration of elderly persons of Kenya, and establishment and management of residential facilities for the elderly, what we call care centers in Kenya, and prohibit the abuse of elderly persons of Kenya. Madam Speaker, the provision of the bill shall apply to all entities providing the services of the elderly persons of Kenya and binds both natural and juristic persons to the application of the extent. The bill seeks to improve the living conditions of the older members of the society by providing for their rights to dignity, right to safety, right to security, education, health, equality, and non-discrimination. Madam Speaker, to realize the objectives of this bill and the purpose of this bill, the government entities and other institutions providing services to the elderly shall be guided by specific principles with common intent to fulfill the basic human rights and principles of respect, protection, promotion, and fulfillment of the rights of the elderly persons as enshrined under Article 57 of the Constitution, principles of fair and equity treatment of the elderly persons of Kenya, accountability of duty bearers, and transparency in implementation of this Act, and pursuant to provision of Article 27 of the Constitution, Madam Speaker, ensure protection of elderly persons from discrimination on any grounds including age, health, status, and disability. Targeted empowerment of the elderly persons, preservation of freedoms and dignity of the elderly persons, and establishment and monitoring of evaluation of mechanisms on how transparency in the management of facilities of the elder care of the elderly. Madam Speaker, the bill delegates registration's power but does not limit to the fundamental rights and freedoms. The bill is seeking to provide the will and form the basis of enhanced service delivery to the elderly in the country, and will fortify legislative architecture with regard to social issues concerning to the elderly people of Kenya. It is in this line, Madam Speaker, that the bill seeks to solve the discrimination that has been happening around the service delivery to the elderly persons of Kenya. The bill also seeks to formulate and provide a legal framework on coordination of activities for people who seeks to provide services to the elderly people of Kenya. The bill prescribed to the eligibility criteria in clause 24 in the state intervention on matters pension and other related benefits accruing to older persons in the society. Other rights include legal representation, family and community care. Madam Speaker, as I seek to move this bill, I am quick to note that the elderly persons of Kenya for a long time have suffered a lot of discrimination. Look at what happens when elderly persons of Kenya are involved in legal matters where they require representation in courts or wherever they need those services. Madam Speaker, most of these people are not able to access legal services, but the government has not provided for any provision where an elderly person of Kenya can get free legal services and support from the government. And that is why this bill is coming in place. Madam Speaker, in the last few years, in the last 1 decade in Kenya, the elderly persons of Kenya have been registered in various government platforms where they are supposed to be provided for their monthly stipend. Madam Speaker, the registration of those people is discriminative. Reason being, the people who are trusted to go and register the elderly persons of Kenya in the villages do not have a legal framework. They do not even have a formal way of keeping their database. It is in this line that we are proposing that we come up with a national body called the National Council for the Elderly People of Kenya, so that the council can come up with a legal framework on how we'll be doing the registration and how we'll be ensuring that there is accountability and transparency when it comes to the dissemination of information, training of the elderly people, informing them on government programs, and more specifically to make sure that accountability of government resources has been taken care of. Madam Speaker, the youth of Kenya have a council. Madam Speaker, the people living with disability in Kenya have their own council. Madam Speaker, we have councils for specific categories of people, but we don't have a council for people who are elderly. We need an advisory council, we need a management council, we need a council that can be able to allocate budgets so that we can be able to know how much money we require. For example, for parents living with diabetes, parents living with hypertension, and even old parents who require other personal care needs. Madam Speaker, it is in that line that I decided to come up with this bill, and I'm forever grateful to this House, and more specifically to the Committee of Labor and Social Protection, headed by the Chairperson, Honorable Alice Wambui-Ng'ang'a, for the immense support that I have received when I struggled to come up with this bill. And I am keen also to note, Madam Speaker, that this is a bill that we all require because we are all subject and victims of old age. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And therefore, I beg to move. Thank you.
You have a seconder?
I would request that the Honorable Naomi Wako seconds.
Honorable Naomi Wako, proceed to second.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I also congratulate Honorable